majority of games these days tend to fall under one of three categories: mindless, silly, or self-aware, usually prioritizing overly violent gameplay as opposed to storytelling and narrative-focused games. This is used especially in marketing these days to go, hey, look how fun and cool we are. Ever fantasized about playing as your nan in a video game and killing some random man? Fantasize no longer. Our crazy game has that. E3 2019 seemed to be absolutely rammed with games like this, and thus it makes me ask the question, has mindlessness and self-awareness in games gone too far? Now, before we can answer this question, I have to explain what I would define as mindless or self-aware. Mindless games are games in which you're doing what you're doing just because. There's no real story that is valid enough to tether you to any form of emotional attachment to the game. You're just there to play the game as a game without any extra thought. And self-awareness doesn't need to be a complete and utter fourth wall break. In my opinion, self-awareness in a game is where the game's world doesn't really take itself seriously. Something only two games that I can list have actually done well, one being Borderlands and the other being the Stanley Parable.
Stanley stepped into the broom closet, but there was nothing here, so he turned around and got back on track. There was nothing here. No choice to make, no path to follow, just an empty broom closet. No reason to still be here. It was baffling that Stanley was still just sitting in the broom closet. He wasn't even doing anything. At least if there was something to interact with, he'd be justified in some way. As it is, he's literally just standing there doing sweet FA.
A lot of games that try this tend to fall flat on their face.
I'm sure you can put this to better use than I can.
Oh, what's this, Greenie? Assassin Christmas.
But what does self-awareness have to do with mindlessness? Well, usually these things come hand in hand. The game tries to do something, but all it really has to offer come the end of it is the mindless shoot 'em up a million times and do absolutely fuck all else worthwhile. Basically Rage 2. Another thing that self-awareness and mindlessness and silliness all have in common is that they kill immersion. They tether you to reality. They destroy that suspense of disbelief. They essentially remind you that you're just playing a game, which can really stunt your attachment to a world and its characters. And fine, if that's the game that you want to go for, making them fair enough, go for it, but do it with a fresh franchise, whereas some companies have been doing it with franchises that were established with a more serious tone to begin with, which makes you go from awesome scenes like this
The Auditori are not dead! I'm still here! Me! Ezio! Ezio Auditore!
to this.
It is purple pie. Eat up. Let it flow through you.
What are you doing?
The first of you evil bearers rode east to find this fruit. Said that the horse that eats it turns into Pegasus. Leave it to the gods to hide it in plain sight.
Why not take a bite yourself? Maybe it'll turn you into a Pegasus too.
Don't believe me? For how much I paid, this fruit has to be real. Here, watch this.
Wait!
Fly, Pegasus, fly!
How tonally inconsistent is that? All to account for silliness and self-awareness in a franchise that was never built on that. What has become of Assassin's Creed?
I have seen enough for one life.
Don't get me wrong, some games are designed to be silly, others not so much. And typically silly games only ever amount to mindless fun. They can't really expand beyond that unless they have an amazing story that really suits this style of game, which few do. So when developers start making games in franchises that weren't silly before stupidly silly alongside putting in mindless fun and self-awareness galore, it gets really frustrating, because that world you're immersed in and felt a part of, maybe at the start of the franchise, not only does a poorly executed silly entry ruin itself, it also ruins the rest of the franchise, because the world that you felt a part of now has this stupid aspect because the stupidity in the stupid entry is canon. He just walks off. But why have Ubisoft, for example, changed massive franchises like Assassin's Creed to account for this more silly tone these days anyways? It appears to be trendy to make a game that's absolutely jammed with mindless ridiculousness, and at E3 2019, nobody exemplified that better than Bethesda. Now, I can't gloss over Bethesda's E3 conference without talking about the most important part. So before the stream started, there were a bunch of tweets up on a board. Essentially, you could tweet hashtag BE3 and post your Bethesda pictures to Twitter, and that would give you a chance of getting on this board before the stream started. Now, I have no idea how, but while the majority of pictures up here are to do with Bethesda and E3, I somehow managed to get up there, and it's just a picture of me posing in between beating the shit out of a fire engine wielding a metal rod. It had nothing to do with Bethesda.
Ethan, look at the bottom. Ethan, look at the bottom.
Ethan, oh my god, Ethan. Oh my god.
Oh my god.
That's amazing. Who did that?
Oh, it's gone. I think they might have taken it down immediately.
That's so good.
They might have taken it off immediately, just like out of panic.
Oh
my god, so good.
Oh my god,
of hours on there.
Oh my god, it's back. It's back.
I
told you it'd get inside. It's so
funny. Look at that.
Unfortunately for Bethesda, this was probably the best part of their conference, and only a handful of people even know about it. Anyways, back to the point. Notable announcements from Bethesda included a Fallout 76 Battle Royale. No, I can't see how that's going to take itself seriously. A trailer about upcoming content for Rage 2, which was structured like a 90s sitcom. Obviously not shooting for a this world takes itself seriously tone. Doom Eternal gameplay, which showed nothing more than killing a load of monsters in hell, which is essentially what Doom is, but at the same time, it's still pretty mindless. A trailer for Wolfenstein Youngblood, which showed a whole lot of killing Nazis, and if that wasn't enough, then a guy took to the stage and emphasized that the game would be about killing Nazis. I mean, what about the story though? It honestly takes a bit more than just a brief outline of a story and a trailer rammed with just murdering people to convince me to buy a game. And then of course there was the announcement of a game called Deathloop. A game which we know nothing beyond what the trailer shows us, which is just two people trying to kill each other over and over again, and when they die, they just wake up where they started. It appeared to be structured better than the other trailers. It made it seem as if it's a bit more than just mindless action, let's kill each other sort of business, but as the trailer went on, it sort of eased back into that vibe of this being a killy kind of game. So at the very least, that's 5 things that will potentially result in mindless fun in which you don't have to use any brain power to play. Not necessarily a bad thing, mindless fun is still fun, but you've got to remember that at the same time you want to immerse yourself in some games sometimes, and a lot of those games just don't happen anymore. Occasionally you'll get a Witcher 3 or a Red Dead Redemption 2, but it's once in a blue moon that you'll be able to find yourself that deeply engaged in a world. And funnily enough, in my opinion, it's these games that appear to be of the highest quality. And with CD Projekt Red's Cyberpunk 2077 coming out next year, alongside other smaller games as well that do take themselves seriously, I'd say that this self-awareness, mindless fun sort of silliness is definitely not going to do too much damage to the industry. And in individual games that have always been the way that they are, where self-awareness is part of the fun, such as Borderlands, with Borderlands 3 coming up, I have no doubts that that'll probably be a fun game. It was self-aware, silly and chaotic before that was cool, so though it does count as part of the trend, it's also one of the games that sort of set it in motion. But what I'm trying to say here is the majority of these games don't appeal to me remotely, but Borderlands 3 certainly does. Now, I don't think that mindlessness has gone too far per se at this point. I think there are a lot of games that do tip towards that sort of end of the spectrum, along with the self-awareness, the silliness, the chaos and all of that. I know that a lot of games are doing that these days, but provided that there's always going to be a lot of games on the other end which take the world seriously, then I don't think it's gone too far, but at the same time I don't think it needs to go any further. One of these games that might be walking the line between the two could be Watchdogs Legion. One of the few games that we actually got gameplay for during the press conference at E3 which shows that the game does take its own world seriously. However, you can still play as an old woman and kill people, so who knows. However, the game appears to have a balance between the dark and silly tones, so who knows what will actually happen with this. We'll just have to wait and see. And honestly, I don't dislike how Watchdogs Legion looks, and though I would say there's definitely an element of self-awareness to this game, I'd imagine it won't be too heavy and won't obstruct you from being immersed in the world like a lot of these games do. And it really all comes down to that. The atmosphere in these games usually finds itself being a little bit stale, which zones me right out of the enjoyment of the game because I can't immerse myself. Don't get me wrong, I'll never go into a game that isn't meant to be immersive to be immersed. For example, I'd never go into a Borderlands game trying to be immersed in it. The big issue here comes from games in franchises that weren't initially like this, that did have a story, weren't mindless fun, and took themselves seriously, that now don't. Obviously, the best example of this is Assassin's Creed, and there is no way that Assassin's Creed Odyssey takes itself remotely seriously. And it's this perception of what fun is that causes developers to make these switches to make their games sillier, less immersive, and more mindless. It's because they think it's fun and it will sell better. And essentially what I'm trying to say is when it affects franchises that shouldn't change quite like that, that's when I believe that these things have gone too far. So the answer to the question in the video's title is very much so a yes and no situation. Yes, in the sense that it's affecting franchises that it shouldn't affect, and no in the sense that if people want to make games that are self-aware, that are chaotic, that are just full of mindless fun, then it's well within their rights to do so. And obviously there's a lot of overlap there, and that's what causes the issue. Another thing I don't understand is why are there so many of these games? What is the demand for games filled with nothing content and really bad jokes? Because it seems insanely high, because a lot of developers are opting to make these games these days. From Bethesda's conference, you can argue that 3 of the games that they spoke about were like this, and you could probably argue it up to 5. And that's at the very least. The way I see it, if you've played one, then you've played the vast majority of them. Some of them are slightly different, however for the most part it's usually the same old stuff, different nick of paint. It's one of the styles of games that rarely sees any proper innovation. And when it comes to tons of games that are more or less the exact same thing, then I have a very simple belief: they don't need to exist. And if you think about it, a lot of these games are just violence for the sake of violence. Now, it's not a bad thing, these are just games, so it's nothing to complain about, but it's what gives video games the reputation that a lot of people use against people, such as video games make you violent. No they don't, that's bullshit, please stop beating me. Though to be fair, I did stab my nan. Assassin's Creed! I didn't actually stab my nan, it's just a running joke. My point is, are these games more hassle than they're worth for everybody? And that's a question that you're going to have to let me know what you think down in the comment section. So in conclusion, for the most part, mindless, chaotic, self-aware and just silly games are stopping themselves from reaching their full potential, because instead of going for a great story, a great atmosphere or great characters, they're opting to make fun of themselves and just be rammed with absolutely nothing worth doing, such as mindless filler content, which really puts you at a disconnect from the game that you're playing. It's worth noting that the genre itself of silly self-awareness and things isn't inherently bad, it's just most of these games don't seem to deliver it properly, and as a result it just comes off as damaging rather than anything else. But that's just my take on it. Please do let me know yours down in the comments section. So that concludes today's video. However, before we go, I just wanted to talk about Patreon. If you want to support the channel or help fund big projects like this and get extra content, then please go over to patreon.com/FishyYarpster. It's just a link, I'm sorry. Currently speaking, it's but a fledgling of what it can be. It's not very big at the moment, but I do intend to do a lot more with it. And with you guys' support, I can make more videos like this one that are a bit longer and take longer to make. My point here is it allows me to make more content. So if you want to go over and support the channel that way, then there is a link in the description, though you definitely don't have to, please don't feel pressured. That being said, I'd like to extend a special thanks to my current patrons. I really appreciate your support. But anyways, please do let me know what you think in the comment section about what we've discussed in today's video. Thank you all for watching, I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends and all that wonderful stuff. I would really appreciate it. And please do let me know what you want my next quote-unquote big video to be. What topic, what game, you know the drill, let me know. But anyways, thank you all for sitting this ramble out, and I will see you all very soon with another video. at some point.